You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about a bunch of Coulda Been a Carpenter. That's right, movies that could have been directed by John Carpenter, but were not. Some great surprises here, some curveballs, some unexpected movies that were not directed by Carpenter. You won't believe it. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bertie Gonzalez. With me today, fellow co-host, Pete Charbonneau. Pete, once again, we find ourselves talking about John Carpenter because, again, if you listen to any episode of the Fan2Fan Podcast and you were playing a drinking game and you were taking a few shots for every reference to Carpenter, I think it's fair to say, Pete, in most states, blood alcohol content would be illegal. You shouldn't drive because you'd be drunk.
You should, but you should definitely get in the Carpenter because we're talking John Carpenter again.
Love it. Love it.
Where did your love of films and filmmaking begin?
In movie theaters when I was a little kid. My mom was a big movie fanatic and took me to everything. And the little town I grew up in, there were 2 downtown theaters and there were 2 drive-ins. And I just went all the time. That's where I fell in love with cinema.
We have talked about a lot of Carpenter movies. Halloween, They Live, Escape from New York, Big Trouble in Little China. But there are a lot of what I'm calling could-have-been Carpenters. The man was very busy in the 80s and into the 90s and certainly left an impression in our childhoods on a lot of cable boxes, in a lot of VHS stores. And his legacy lives on because we keep talking about his movies. They merit discussion 20, 40, 30 years later since we first saw them. But there are a ton of movies that did not make it to the box office that were all intended for Carpenter to direct. And Pete, I've got a list. And if you don't mind, I'm going to throw a few at you and see what we think about these could have been Carpenters.
All right, check them out there.
First one, 1977, he was going to adapt from the book The Prometheus Crisis, a movie called Meltdown that he basically said was, quote, Halloween in a nuclear power plant. So you think about like 3 Mile Island and all the stuff that was happening in that time, a lot of discussions about nuclear power, and kind of makes sense. The interesting thing is the killer in that one was referenced in the script as the Figure. And then just a year later, he makes Halloween that we know Michael Myers to be the Shape. So you can kind of see that even for a movie he didn't make, there's DNA that went into Halloween.
So the Meltdown was not about like a 3-year-old's temper tantrum that turns into like a deadly, like psionic force emanating out, killing everyone around it.
Not at all. No, that was not it. No,
that's a different one. All right.
Yeah. Well, or the very dramatic melting of ice cream. I think he tackled all the ice cream melting in Assault on Precinct 13.
Once you go that scene, I'm not sure you can go anywhere else.
Not at all. That was an assault for everyone that saw it.
Can I get an ice cream?
It's late, sweetheart. I'm closed.
The music's still playing.
What flavor?
Vanilla twist.
Oh, Jesus, come on. Come on, I'll give you my money. Just don't hurt me, please. Please.
Hey, this is regular vanilla. I wanted vanilla twist.
El Diablo in 1980. And if you know anything about Carpenter, he is a fan of Westerns. Grew up on Howard Hawks, John Ford, John Wayne, and he co-wrote with frequent collaborator Tommy Lee Wallace, a comedy Western titled El Diablo that eventually was directed by Peter Markle. It was produced, though, by Carpenter and Deborah Hill.
We're starting a new Kid Durango book today. Yay! This is one of my personal favorites.
This is Billy Ray Smith. He was one of the finest school teachers in the territory of Arizona.
Do you ever think about me, Billy Ray, as a woman?
Of course I do.
That is, until El Diablo kidnapped the teacher's pet.
Bingo! I intend to bring back Nettie. You and who else, school teacher? Me and Kid Durango, that's who.
Now Billy Ray is about to find out the hard way that he'll need a lot more than a fast gun.
You need bigger bottles.
And a good horse. Billy needs help.
You shot him in the back.
Anthony Edwards.
Whose back was to me?
And Louis Gossett Jr. in El Diablo.
Even though a lot of his movies like Escape from New York, certainly vampires, they kind of have that like Western vibe to them, but maybe post-apocalyptic wasteland, or obviously with vampire hunters. It just feels like, wow, Carpenter never actually directed a Western, but he wanted to.
I'm trying to picture him on location in like a Western scene, and it's so hard to do just knowing, his career at this point. But I'm sure back then it would have been a different story if he had the opportunity to direct one. Although, as you've certainly pointed out, and I think Josh and others guests that have been on the show, maybe Western in name, but something like Assault on Precinct 13, which is like, I think, kind of like an homage to Rio Bravo.
That's right.
While it may not look with the trappings of a Western, I think there were certainly a lot of Western themes in a lot of his movies.
Absolutely.
For the gang called Street Thunder, it is a day of vengeance. It's war in the streets. It's terror in the night. It's the most shattering assault on a police station in history.
They're not afraid to die. Any of them want to rip us apart, no matter what it costs.
Assault on Precinct 13.
The first time I worked with 35 millimeter and Panavision on Assault on Precinct 13, it was independently financed again, so there wasn't a big producer presence over my head. But it was stunning having to get up that early in the morning and go work. I just wasn't used to it. And it was a really grueling shoot. My longest day on that film, 24 hours in and out.
Wow.
In a real jail. And it was a nightmare. It was an eye-opener in terms of what you have to do to prepare. What do I need to do to prepare this film? That was my real big training ground there.
Oh, and it's a big action film with a lot going on, even though it's in one location for the most part.
It's a little tiny movie, Mick.
It's a little tiny movie, but there's a lot going on, and that's really tough stuff to do, especially when you've got walls being shot out and things blowing up. Yeah. Must have been an interesting experience,
It was. But it was the physical hammering that you take on it that I wasn't prepared for yet.
Now, have you always been drawn to genre, whether it's Western or thriller or science fiction or horror?
Man, in the beginning, I just wanted to be a director. I didn't care.
Another one that certainly leaned into a trend that we're both very familiar with, 1983's The Ninja, that would have been based on the 1980 novel The Ninja. That was all part of, obviously, the 80s ninja trend. Lots of martial arts movies that came out, Karate Kid, American Ninja, Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3, The Domination, all of these movies that we loved, except this version would have been a horror slasher movie with the ninja, and Carpenter said, quote, would have been the most expensive martial arts movie ever made. And you would think, when I first heard that, I'm like, I don't know. And then I immediately thought of all those really cheesy Samurai Sunday movies that you saw in Pix and I saw in my neck of the woods in Chicago.
Welcome to Super 66 Samurai Sunday.
I don't think any of those movies had anything close to like a decent budget. So I think Carpenter was probably not off. If he's making a movie for $10-15 million in 1983, yeah, that probably is the most expensive ninja martial arts movie ever made to that time.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what like Enter the Dragon cost to produce, but now I'm just thinking that we lost out on the opportunity to have that John Carpenter Sho Kosugi partnership.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to guess Enter the Dragon, everything went towards John Saxon's, all of his needs.
Chest waxing.
That's right. That all goes to that. Speaking of chest waxing, here's the best transition. He was also supposed to do Santa Claus, the movie, in 1984. No relation. But he did want Brian Dennehy or Wilford Brimley to play Santa Claus. Ilya Salkind, who was behind Superman, did not agree, and also Supergirl. And they went on to make 1985 Santa Claus. When I think about like the holiday season and I kind of run through all of the staples, Home Alone, Christmas Story, Vacation. This is like 85 Santa Claus is one of those like, oh, hey, this is on TBS or something. But like, I don't run to it because it was kind of forgettable. I'm guessing if it was directed by Carpenter, it would have had something that would have made it interesting. But hey, we lost out on a Carpenter-directed Santa Claus holiday movie.
Was that like Charles Durning as Santa Claus in that one? Or
That's how forgettable that 85 version is, Pete, that I couldn't even tell you.
Okay.
Couldn't tell you.
If you know out there in Fan2Fan land, let us know or don't. We don't really care. It's not.
Yeah. Doesn't matter. Yep. Oh, we know we also lost out on a Brian Dennehy or Wilford Brimley Santa Claus.
Ryan Dennehy battling Wilford Brimley for the chance to become Santa Claus. That would be a great John Carpenter movie.
And maybe what they didn't tell us, because it was never made, it was actually the same character Wilford Brimley played in The Thing in 1982. And actually, it's not Santa Claus. It's actually the alien, The Thing creature coming to play the part of Santa Claus.
But looking like Santa Claus.
Yes, looking like Santa Claus. But
and
actually
the reindeer. And you have to do a blood test on all the reindeer because they don't know which reindeer is actually a reindeer.
Think about everything we lost that we could have had, Pete. So much.
God damn it. Wow.
So much.
My big love was Westerns, first of all, but science fiction and horror movies. The 50s is a golden age for science fiction movies and monster movies, which I loved dearly.
And did you want to make them when you were a kid?
I wasn't sure what was going on with movies at first until I kept seeing this one name over and over again on films that I kind of recognized, and that was Roger Corman. So I said, well, what is this director business? What does he do? I finally found out. I didn't know then. I was very young.
1984 comes around, and he was supposed to direct Firestarter, the adaptation of the Stephen King novel. And I think that one merits its own 5 to 10 minute episode. So definitely listen to that one, folks, because we get into more of the weeds into that. And because, again, Carpenter was busy in the 80s and 90s, here's a quick fire. Bunch of movies that he was slated, at least considered, to direct. Beat Top Gun. Eventually comes out. Tony Scott, 1986. Not Carpenter. Fatal Attraction. Tombstone, the 1993 Western, which would have been interesting because maybe that could have worked out. And then Kurt Russell, that could have worked.
Oh, by a lot of insider rumblings, kind of did direct that.
I think probably Russell would have been in maybe more comfortable hands if Carpenter was directing, but would that movie have been the summer popcorn 4-quadrant film that it kind of became? Who's to say? I'd like to think Carpenter's version might have been a little bit more edgy. Maybe he would have had some commentary thrown in there, as he likes to put in a lot of his films.
Style is all about instinct. It's all about how a director sees things. If you watch any of the directors that you admire, or I admire, anyone admires, and you watch their work, you can see what their concerns are and how they approach things and how they approach the characters, how they approach the world they're in. So it's instinctual type thing. A director makes movies about himself all the time, in some way or another. So, but it's finding a way to express, in visual terms, the instincts that you have, the feelings that you have inside. And I had no idea how to do that. So that taught me.
We didn't see John Carpenter's The Exorcist 3. William Blatty, who originally wrote The Exorcist, actually wrote Exorcist 3 as a screenplay that later turned into the novel Legion. He wanted Carpenter to direct Legion. Carpenter, Blatty had different versions for what that film would be. Carpenter's out. Blatty comes in. Turns out the studio says, hey, even that ending that you like, Blatty, the one that Carpenter didn't like, yeah, we're still not going to even let you do that, even though you wrote the book and you directed it. Talk about adaptations. The Beast, Peter Benchley, who wrote Jaws. Carpenter was slated to direct that. Did not work out. The Creature from the Black Lagoon. He was going to direct a remake in the early 90s. Again, that's one that we'll have to talk about a little bit more detail because there are more details to that one to share. A lot of these are just quick little, like internet finds. It's like, wow, Carpenter, Top Gun, who would have thought? But didn't go very far. Movies like Firestarter, Creature from the Black Lagoon, there's more to talk about, and we do on those episodes. Godzilla, he was actually slated to direct Godzilla King of the Monsters in 3D that was being developed by Steve Miner. Would have been the first American adaptation of, obviously, the famous Japanese kaiju. Never happened. I do know that maybe a few years ago, so maybe this is like 2022-ish, Scream Factory or Shout Factory had their streaming channel, and Carpenter actually did like some commentary and some intros for some Godzilla films. So I think he's always been a fan of Godzilla and kaiju films. So this one actually kind of makes sense.
Just in time for Godzilla Day. Join horror master John Carpenter for a marathon of hand-picked Godzilla monster movies.
Hi there, I'm John Carpenter, a giant Godzilla fan. No matter how Godzilla is manifested on the screen, his roar lives on.
Masters of Monsters, a Godzilla Monster Marathon, hosted by John Carpenter. Streaming live November 3rd through the 6th.
Halloween, obviously he directed the original in 1978, and they wanted him to come back a few times to direct Halloween 4. Didn't pan out. Halloween H2O, asking price was a little too much. Jamie Lee Curtis really wanted him to come back. Didn't work out. However, Steve Miner rears his head again. Didn't work out for Godzilla. Steve Miner ends up directing Halloween H2O. And then there was a Halloween / Michael Myers / Hellraiser / Pinhead crossover that Carpenter was supposed to direct. Don't know what that movie would have looked like, but you think Stephen King Carpenter, Clive Barker Carpenter? Could have been interesting.
I'm kind of glad that he never dipped back into directing a Halloween film. I feel like, he said what he wanted to say, and he's been gracious enough to come back and supply music to the new trilogy. And I don't know if he's gotten producer credit, but I know he's given them his blessing. But I like the fact that he kind of just left it. Again, like, I feel like he probably felt like he was pretty burned in the past, coming out with Halloween 3. Here's a great new way to kind of just churn out a great scary story every year, except the audience was not interested at all in that because no Michael Myers, no box office, or not enough box office. I don't mind the fact that he said no to all those later Halloween projects.
Yeah. And kind of makes sense if you think about his track record. There's not a lot of retread in his filmography. It feels like he's trying to do something different. And even though it always feels like genre fare, a lot of them have become cult classics, but he seems like he wants to do different things. Started early in his career in Dark Star, where there's a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of humor. Someone's watching you, a lot of Hitchcock, but also, there's some thriller elements in there. So it feels like having him come back to Halloween when he couldn't do it the way he would want to do it, well, that's when you get Halloween 3. So maybe you don't have him come back for Halloween 4 or anything thereafter. Because like you said, I think he had everything to say he had already done it.
My job in making Halloween was to do an exploitation horror film. And the basic premise was given to me by my distributor, Irwin Yablans. He said, let's do a movie about these babysitters who get stalked by a killer. He figured that everybody could identify with babysitting. So many teenagers had done it. And then a little bit later, he came up with the idea of calling it Halloween. Let's set it on Halloween. I didn't call it Halloween. Never been used as a title before. Never been used at all. It was an underutilized holiday, so great. And I was a young director then, and I was hungry for experience, hungry for features. I had done some work before then. I said, sure, why not? Well, when we were making the film, I thought, it's Halloween at night, and people get dressed up in masks. What better way to have a killer not be identified than be wearing a mask?
But he didn't feel that way about Snake Plissken because he was working with Kurt Russell to do a Escape from Earth that would have happened after the events of L.A. So spoiler alert, end of Escape from L.A., Kurt Russell's character, Snake Plissken, basically takes off the entire power, like everything on Earth. At some point, he ends up escaping and trying to find another world to basically be Snake Plissken. So that could have happened. There were talks of a TV series, an animation, like an anime type series. Never panned out, but Carpenter was always involved. He liked that character enough where that's one of the few that actually has a sequel that he directed. And I think probably just wanted to do another movie with his pal, Kurt Russell.
Mm-hmm. And why not? I mean, they're a great pairing. Am I mistaken? Was Ghosts of Mars kind of like supposed to be what Escape from Earth was going to be.
That's what I read too, that there were some elements for what would have been that third Snake Plissken movie that were just kind of put into Ghost of Mars. And even at the end of Ghost of Mars, there's a little bit of a cliffhanger to make you think, was Carpenter doing this because he wanted to revisit it? Was the studio saying, leave this a little open-ended because maybe this is the universe we'll go back to? Mm-hmm. But it almost feels, again, like you could almost take the character of Snake Plissken, put him in Ghost of Mars. In that character, it would have worked. It's basically Escape from Earth. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So those could have been a Carpenter's, but you said you found a few.
Well, I didn't find a few. I took it as a thought exercise.
Okay.
When I was thinking could have been a Carpenter, I was thinking like, okay, instead of, if he did not direct a certain movie, what might he have done instead that came out?
Ooh, I like where you're going with this.
And
okay.
I took two points, and for very selfish reasons. One, 1984, he did Starman.
Yes.
Which received, what was Jeff Bridges?
Jeff Bridges got the nomination. Yep.
For,
and also, I think the only Oscar nomination in John Carpenter's filmography.
Yes. Karen Allen, great, and everything she does is in that. But I was never a huge fan of it. I think, again, because when it came out, I was like, John Carpenter, he makes horror movies, and I want to be scared. And so this is very different. So I was like, all right, well, that's one point of like, if he didn't direct Starman, what else that came out might he have? And this is not based on anything that it was in talks with. This was just other movies that came out in 84 that he could have been attached to. So you had Friday the 13th Part 4.
Jason is back. 3 times before.
Sorry to change your mind?
You have felt the terror, known the madness, lived the horror. But this is the one you've been screaming for. Because Friday, April 13th, will be Jason's unlucky day. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, rated R.
Now showing at a theater near you.
Does he jump franchises and tackle, at the time, was supposed to be the final chapter? That might have been interesting because of the King connection, Children of the Corn.
Ooh.
Might have made that a little bit more interesting than what we got on screen. When I was thinking of this, I was thinking of movies that, because there might have been some big movies that came out in 84. I don't know if Temple of Doom, but there were blockbuster ones. But if it was like a big time director attached to it, I didn't include that on the list because I figured that was like very much that director's thing. But one that it might have been a lot of fun, Buckaroo Banzai. John Carpenter doing Buckaroo Banzai, that might have been really cool.
Buckaroo, President's on line 1, calling about is everything okay with the alien spacecraft from Planet 10, or should he just go ahead and destroy Russia?
Tell him yes on 1 and no on 2.
Experience the adventures of Buckaroo Banzai across the 8th dimension. Rated PG. Check newspapers for selected theaters.
Which was yes, destroy Russia or number 2?
Yep. And considering that the guy who wrote Buckaroo Banzai also wrote the script for Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So there could have been a lot of that connective tissue where if he saw the same, mashup of comedy, martial arts, sci-fi, like the cool weirdness that is Buckaroo Banzai that he eventually like puts together for Big Trouble, like, yeah, I could absolutely have seen him directed either one.
Yeah. What immediately jumped into my mind was Big Trouble in Little China because he'd done something like that. So I'm like, what? Maybe he dips into that maybe a year or two earlier. That could have been an interesting, collaboration on screen. The Last Starfighter, which he probably would not have been done because Nick Castle directed that one. But I'm like, oh, that'd be an interesting connection. I wonder what he could have done if he had gotten attached to The Last Starfighter. Again, a little bit lighter fare.
I think Kurt Russell would have played the arcade machine or the dog.
Tommy Lee Wallace or Jamie Lee Curtis would have provided like the digitized voice for the arcade game.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
Insert coin. And a couple more for 84. Dreamscape.
Oh, I could absolutely.
Imagine entering a world of mystery, passion, and terror that has never been seen before. The world of your dreams. Dreamscape. When you close your eyes, the adventure begins. Dreamscape, rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday at a selected theater near you.
I think that might have been a real interesting John Carpenter movie.
Yeah. a movie that we both love and appreciate for almost what it was, but also very rarely, I think, do either one of us want to champion a remake. It's like, hey, it was good. Go revisit it. It's still good. But this just it was such a good high concept. It was like Inception before Inception, but Dennis Quaid, and just a really good movie in the 80s.
And I think, again, like going back to John Carpenter's ethos and aesthetic, like a movie about going into the dreams of the president of the United States to assassinate him. Like that's something that he would have been like, yes, let me at it. Let me at this script.
I think in Carpenter versions, Pete, they get away with it.
You probably, yeah. I think the roles get reversed, and Daniel Patrick Kelly is actually the protagonist, and
especially if it's Reagan.
The snake, Snake. There you go, Snake Plissken. Maybe the snake has an eye patch in that instead.
That's right.
Okay, a couple of more for 84. Runaway, Tom Selleck, Gene Simmons. Figured that he might have been able to throw like a even more dark and twisted turn on that one, which is kind of I don't know. I've always enjoyed it. It's not the greatest movie, and it's not that heavy a hitter of a movie, but Carpenter get attached to something like that, throwing a little more sci-fi.
Sure.
Again, kind of an interesting police state in the future.
Yep.
I feel like he might have been able to, add a little Carpenter magic to something like that.
He's done it before. He would do it again.
Yeah. And then my wild card, Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. I love the John Carpenter direct a breakdancing movie with Lucinda Dickey.
That's right.
And then you've got Boogaloo Shrimp. The mind just can go in any different directions, wondering what that movie might have looked like.
It's funny. That's actually not as ridiculous, Pete, because I think I read somewhere that the folks at Canon had thrown some money at Carpenter, I think for like a 2-picture deal. But when that didn't pan out, it was Tobe Hooper who took the deal and wound up making Life Force. And I forget what the other Canon film was. I don't think it was Invaders from Mars, the remake of that like 50s movie.
No.
But it was Carpenter who was also offered that. So I could absolutely, no, I can't see Carpenter directed Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, but I could certainly see like Carpenter have directed something for Canon Films that would have starred Lucinda Dickey, because that actually would all make complete sense.
Oh, I can tell. From when we had that discussion on Canon Films, they gave their directors a lot of leeway.
Yes.
And I feel like Carpenter, that would have been a good, if the budget was right and the money was right for Carpenter, I feel like that would have been a good situation for him to kind of go back to just doing the movies that he wanted with very little interference. That would have been an interesting happenstance if the Carpenter-Canon connection ever came to fruition. And then finally, we'll go through this list a little quicker, but 1992 is my other flashpoint, where he directed Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
That's right.
A movie that I have not seen. So again, I was like, well, what if we just take that off
Neither has Chevy Chase, and he was in it.
A more compelling adventure would be hard to imagine.
There is an invisible man loose in San Francisco.
A more unusual hero would be hard to find.
When do I get the invisible man?
I'll get him soon, very soon. I'm the one that kills people.
In a movie like you've never seen before. Chevy Chase.
I want my molecules back!
Daryl Hannah.
How am I going to tell my mom about this?
Memoirs of an Invisible Man. Rated PG-13.
Chevy. Yeah, Chevy. So some movies that came out in 92 that maybe could have been attached to instead. Meatballs 4, Corey Feldman.
Like the way you think, Pete.
Getting a little more serious. The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
Oh, sure.
Rebecca De Mornay. I feel like that might have been, it's a little more of just like a straight up thriller. But again, I feel like with Carpenter at the helm,
it works. Yeah.
Maybe that was a successful release. But, he, again, just adding a little more shades of darkness to a movie like that was already pretty dark, might have even just upped it even more. A couple other, Universal Soldier. You want to go the action route, Van Damme.
Carpenter was supposed to direct a movie called Shadow Company, which was essentially about soldiers who were dead, who were brought back to life as zombies.
Okay.
And how one of them kind of breaks ranks and tries to reconnect with his family. Now, obviously being undead, so there's some challenges. Yeah, if you've seen Universal Soldier a few times, and we have, it doesn't take a necklace of ears to hear that maybe that's actually not that far off from what would have been Carpenter's Shadow Company. So 100%, dead on, Pete.
Yeah, I feel like by 1992, I think that might have been something that he could have easily been attached to.
Yep.
A couple of rapid fire, Brandon Lee and Powers Booth. Like, again, like if you want to go more of like the straight action route, and from what we had talked about earlier with, maybe directing the ninja.
Sure.
This less maybe ninja, but, Brandon Lee, obviously an accomplished martial artist in his own right. Maybe there's something there that he lends itself to. Another personal favorite of mine, Passenger 57, Wesley Snipes, Always Bet on Black. Just an extremely entertaining movie, but I feel like John Carpenter directing that, it goes from a kind of fondly remembered, if not well-remembered movie to maybe cult classic. Who knows? We'll never know the answers to any of these questions, which is why we're just enjoying this exercise.
That's right.
And then to just wrap it up, Glengarry Glen Ross, Carpenter tackling David Mamet's text.
Could have been interesting.
It's a little bit out of his wheelhouse, maybe, but I think you're dealing with some interesting characters in that.
Sure.
That I would love to have seen what he could have done with that.
Yep, a lot of cynicism, a lot of commentary on capitalism there. And what was the line that Baldwin says? ABC, always be closing.
Exactly.
Could have been always be Carpenter. Just saying.
Always be Carpentering. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with Light Sleeper.
Okay.
Which was directed by Paul Schrader, starring Willem Dafoe. And I only picked that just because of the line at the end of the thing. I'm a real light sleeper child. So maybe you have a character named Childs in that who is the light sleeper. And so there's there's that tie into earlier in his career. And finally, movie K2, which was like K2, the Widowmaker.
The Everest climbing movie, Pete?
Yeah, and I only say that because he could have directed my Aunt Patricia, who was starring in that movie.
Oh, there you go. I was going to give you...
Oh, Light Sleeper.
Light Sleeper. I've never heard of that movie, but you said Paul Schrader, and he directed the remake of Cat People, and he has such a weird, like, I put him in the David Cronenberg category. Like, I don't always appreciate their movies. They're a little bit over my head, but like David Lynch, I'm like, I get it. They have a very specific audience. I think Carpenter is like maybe closer to the middle of the needle of some of those guys where they're very much auteurs. So I could have given you that. K2, well, I mean, obviously with your aunt in it, maybe, yes.
That's the only reason why I picked it. I can't imagine Carpenter directing on location.
And imagine the story she could have told you about Carpenter on set.
Exactly. That's true. I mean, again, like I said, this was a selfish list on my part. I mean, just take two movies that I don't have fond memories of from John Carpenter and just erase them from history and replace them with any one of these.
That's what happens when you get your own podcast, people. You can do all of this.
I can do what I want.
That's right.
New York was great. What?